Hi everybody and good morning. Welcome back to biology class, and today we're going to continue topic 7, but we're going to do factors affecting transpiration. Before we get into that, let's do a recap of our previous lesson. So we looked at water loss in plants, and this is a summary. Water vapor can be lost from the leaves, and they go through this process where it starts at the surface of the mesophyll cells, and then water vapor will go into the intercellular airspace and then finally exit through the stomata. At the surface of the mesophyll cells, this is where evaporation of the water film occurs. And this is where the water film will be converted from liquid to gas. And their gas form, we call it the water vapor. And as the concentration of water vapor increases in the intercellular airspace, water vapor will then be able to diffuse down a concentration gradient from the intercellular airspace, and they would then exit through the stomata. And this is how water vapor is lost from the leaves to the atmosphere. Here, this is just a visualizer for you guys, showing the evaporation of water film causing a higher concentration of water vapor inside the leaves compared to outside. So greater concentration of water vapor also refers to increasing in humidity. And since there's lower humidity or lower concentration of water vapor outside in the atmosphere, then the water vapor will diffuse down a concentration gradient, and then they would finally exit the leaf and get into the atmosphere instead. So we have also learned in one of the previous subtopics is about how water moves up the plant. Water moves up the plant by three forces, and overall, when water is lost from the leaves, you call that transpiration. But water can move up with these three forces. So the first force that we learned was root pressure, the second one is capillarity, and the third one is transpiration pull. And we're going to look into how all of that is related to the definition of transpiration. So firstly, root pressure. Root hair cells, this happens when you have root hair cells and they are actually absorbing water. And because the root hair cells absorbs a lot of water from the soil, this causes a pressure, and this pressure pushes water from the root hair cells to the xylem vessels, which is found at the center of the root. And this happens via diffusion and osmosis. Root pressure forces water from the roots to the stem. So it goes up a little bit. Then after that, there is this other force called capillarity, which is the tendency for liquids to travel upwards through a very narrow tube. And this can be seen or it can be observed when we actually have different size tubes. So for example, this is a very, very narrow tube. You get a bigger one and then another one with a bigger lumen. You can even see this kind of capillarity happening if you have two different straws, for example. A straw that you drink bubble tea with versus a normal straw that doesn't have the bubble. And if you just put it in, if it is a clear straw and you put it in liquid, you're going to see that water will travel upwards. And they do that pretty much, I would say, automatically or naturally, and you call that capillarity. This force called capillarity also forces water up the stem even further. And then we have the last force called the transpiration pull. This force draws up water from the stem to replace water lost by evaporation. And this happens because there's this continuous stream of water, and this continuous stream of water actually pulls water, and this is actually the ability of water as well, where they kind of stick together. And this is caused by the process of transpiration. So what is transpiration? It is the evaporation of water from the surface of the mesophyll cells, followed by the loss of water vapor from the leaves through the stomata. So basically, transpiration happens because of the evaporation of the water film and then diffusion out through the stomata and into the atmosphere. So this whole thing from evaporation plus diffusion and then going outside to the stomata, that is all transpiration. Now we have pretty much recapped on how water vapor is lost, and secondly about transpiration and how it happens. We're finally going to get into our learning objective, which is 7.2.3, to explain the effects of wind speed and the variation of temperature, humidity, and light intensity on transpiration rate. And part B, which is how wilting occurs. So today's step to success is to describe the factors which affect transpiration rate and explain how wilting is related to water loss. So what is transpiration rate? Transpiration rate is the rate at which transpiration occurs, and it refers to the amount of water lost by plants over a given time period. So just like how we calculate rate of everything else, it has to be, you count the amount and then it has to be within the time. There's a time limit, or within a specific time you're counting it. And transpiration rate can actually be measured by using this apparatus, and this whole thing right here is called a potometer. It is a device used to estimate the transpiration rates. And what happens is that you can basically count. So there is an air bubble that starts over here, and you can reset this bubble and move it, I think, by using this right here. There's a reservoir of water, and you can push that air bubble out until the starting point, basically. And what's going to happen is so once you close this reservoir here, that means that no water is moving down here to push the air bubble away anymore. And what's going to move the air bubble in the end is actually water loss by transpiration. So once water vapor is lost and water keeps on being replaced here, right? And water is continuously lost by transpiration, what happens is that this bubble will actually move closer and closer to this plant right here. So let's just read this part. Experimental method. The distance moved by an air bubble can be recorded every minute and used to indicate the rate of water uptake by the plant. So water being taken up and also being lost. And what we can do is that, so every minute you can count how much distance that the bubble moved. So from here to here to here, you're going to count that, and that will give you a rate. And that is what we call the transpiration rate. If you want to pretty much have a look at how the potometer works, you can watch this video on YouTube. So just click this link. I'm going to put this link in the description box below. I've always wanted to say that. Okay, so please click on this link and have a look. Okay, so we're going to look at the factors affecting transpiration rate now. And the first part is that we're going to talk about what are these environmental factors and how can they affect transpiration. So transpiration is essentially, it starts off with the evaporation of water from the mesophyll layer, isn't it? And the fact that it starts off with evaporation means that any changes that increases or reduces evaporation would have the same effect on overall transpiration. So if you want to think about this and remember this much more quicker and easier, I would say try to think about the optimal conditions of drying clothes. So the first factor we're looking at is effect of air movement. So when you want to dry clothes, where would you put it? Would you put it inside the house, or would you put it outside of the house? And why would you put it outside the house? What is there outside the house that could help your clothes dry faster? Firstly, you know that there's a sun. When there's more sun, your clothes will dry much more faster. And secondly, because there's wind outside. But in the case that, it's raining, and so you have to put your clothes indoors, you can turn on the electric fan to help your clothes dry faster. And why is it suddenly your clothes are drying faster? Because of the sun and the fan. They don't do that magically, but it has to do with actually the evaporation of water that is on your clothes, and then it evaporates, and then finally clothes become dry. So this is essentially something similar to the effects of air movement and maybe temperature on transpiration. So firstly, let's look at wind speed. Air movements, for example, wind speed, will change the overall humidity. Humidity means the concentration of water vapor, and air movements or wind speed will change the overall humidity around the outside of the leaf. So we're looking at over here, outside of the leaf. In moving air, wind speed is very high. And when wind speed is high, water vapor surrounding the leaf will be swept away. So imagine if you put a fan near your leaf. What happens is that we're going to have air movement going that way. So obviously the water vapor surrounding the leaf will move in the direction of the wind. So I'm going to show that again. So because of the wind, it's going to move. In the case that not all of the water vapor moves, we can see that most of them move, and overall this causes the humidity outside of the leaf to reduce. Remember that humidity refers to the concentration of water vapor. So we say that because humidity is reduced, then outside of the leaf becomes less humid, and this increases the concentration gradient of water vapor to diffuse outwards. So because before it is more humid, that means that the concentration gradient is much more smaller. But as we have wind blowing here and moving the water vapor away from the surrounding air, we have a greater concentration gradient. That means that diffusion is going to happen much more faster. And since diffusion is happening much more faster, overall transpiration will be faster as well. So transpiration rate increases with wind speed increasing as well. Secondly, let's look at effects of temperature. When the sun shines on the leaves will absorb heat as well as light energy. The heat energy warms the leaves, causing an increase in evaporation of water on the mesophyll layer. So this is just basic physics, where higher temperature would also mean that evaporation rate would increase. So as evaporation of mesophyll layer increases, then overall transpiration rate would also increase. Now let's look into light intensity. Plants carry out photosynthesis by absorbing light energy from the sun. And as photosynthesizing cells of the leaf will make glucose, they're going to store this in the chloroplast and the cytoplasm as starch. And in the lower epidermis, guard cells can carry out photosynthesis because they are specialized cells and they are the only ones in the lower epidermis that actually has chloroplast. So why is that important? If you guys remember the topic when we were talking about how guard cells open and close. So firstly, what is the function of guard cells? They control the size of the stomata and they can carry out photosynthesis. So during the day, when there is sunlight, photosynthesis occurs and sugar is produced. So this then lowers the water potential of the guard cells. Water then enters the guard cells from the surrounding lower epidermal cells by osmosis, and guard cells will expand and become more turgid. And as they become more turgid, the guard cells will curve up and the stomatopore will open even more. So they get curved up because actually the inner wall over here of the guard cells is much more thicker. So as they become more turgid, the stomatopore will open much more bigger. And then therefore, if the pores are bigger, that means that transpiration or more water vapor can actually diffuse out. During the night, because there's no light, photosynthesis stops and sugars are used up for respiration, and that means that guard cells would have an increase in water potential because there's less concentration of glucose or starch. Actually, glucose, because the starch is converted back to glucose. Okay, back to here. Lower epidermal cells have lower water potential than the guard cells relatively. So water will exit the guard cells by osmosis. So as the guard cells loses turgidity, what happens is that they become flaccid and the stomatopore will close. So this is during the night. So here for the factor affecting transpiration, we're looking at light intensity, and that is during the day. So during high light intensity, so more light, guard cells will carry out more photosynthesis. And this means that the stomatopore will open even more. So as the stomata opens wider, as in the guard cells opens wider and the stomatopore becomes bigger, more water vapor will diffuse out of the leaf, increasing the transpiration rate. So those are the factors affecting transpiration. And what about wilting then? Everybody knows that this plant right here is pretty much wilting, and at the end it will become wilted. And what is wilting actually? How do you explain that? So wilting occurs when plants, they lose turgor or they become limp. And this is due to the excessive loss of water. That means that they lose water quite a lot. And how does that actually occur? So rate of transpiration becomes when rate of transpiration is higher than rate of absorption of water by the roots. Then this is when water is being lost excessively and the plant cells loses turgidity. After they lose turgidity, or they become flaccid. So flaccid is when you can see that the shape of the cells. I think the best word to describe it is also cells become plasmolyzed. So as they become flaccid, less support by the cell walls is given, and so the cells become limp, and then overall you have that wilted. So the two keywords we're looking at here is losing turgor and becoming limp. So what this means is that you have a normal cell here. So when you have normal plant cell, you have the vacuole being filled with lots of water, and so the vacuole is going to push against the cell wall. It's going to push the cell membrane against the cell wall, and this pressure is what we call turgor pressure. And because turgor pressure exists, then the cell becomes turgid. But as the plant cell loses more water, what happens is that the vacuole would decrease in size and it becomes plasmolized, where the cell membrane would retreat away from the cell wall, and therefore there is no turgor pressure anymore pushing the cell wall. So before, the plant cell is turgid and it becomes upright, so the whole plant is upright. But when the plant cell loses turgidity, plant cells become limp and therefore wilted overall. So some factors can increase wilting. Firstly, high temperatures, where you have more evaporation of water at the mesophyll layer, meaning transpiration rate increases. Secondly, low humidity, where there is a greater concentration gradient. That means that water vapor will diffuse out even more at a higher rate. And strong winds can cause low humidity. Another thing that can cause water to be lost excessively is, okay, these three are about excessive water loss, but this part right here is about not absorbing water fast enough. And what causes water not being absorbed fast enough is poorly developed root systems. For example, xylem is not transporting the absorbed water to the leaves fast enough, and this usually occurs when plants are still young. So that means that the xylem vessels and the transport vessels and transport system is not fully developed. Okay, so let's go back to our S2S, where we had to describe the factors which affect transpiration rate and explain how wilting is related to water loss. Firstly, wind speed. The wind speed sweeps away water vapor from the leaf surfaces. This reduces overall humidity outside of the leaf, increases concentration gradient for diffusion of water vapor, and therefore transpiration rate will increase. Okay, second, we have to look at temperature. Heat from the sun is absorbed by the leaves, and this increases the temperature of the leaf, therefore increasing evaporation of the water film, and overall transpiration rate increases. Then we have this part right here, light intensity. Increasing light intensity increases rate of photosynthesis and concentration of glucose in guard cells. Therefore, water will enter guard cells from surrounding epidermal cells by osmosis, causing the guard cells to become turgid and opening the stomata pore. Therefore, more water vapor will be lost by diffusion, and overall transpiration rate increases. The second part of the step to success is we have to explain how wilting is related to water loss. So it has to be this part right here about losing turgidity. Wilting happens when the rate of transpiration exceeds water absorption by the roots. So that means the rate of transpiration is higher than water is being replaced by absorption of water by the roots. Plant cells begin to lose water by transpiration, and plant cells loses turgidity. Plant cells lose support provided by turgor pressure of cell wall. Therefore, plants become limp and wilted. So that is the end of today. I hope you guys are doing great. If you have any questions, please send me a message. So thank you so much, and I'll see you guys next time.